While I've been working on the bulldozer and doing some other things, I've still been plugging away at my concrete here. And this is the ground level here. So the foundation of this tower is finished. And I've started above ground level. So basically I've got step 0 finished. And I've just begun step 1 maybe a week ago. I'm not using any steel in my concrete, so cracks have developed. And right here, a while ago, a crack started opening up, and every day it would be a tiny bit wider, a tiny bit wider, and over a few weeks it kept growing until it got to about a quarter-inch wide, maybe a little more, like a centimeter. Nah, not quite a centimeter, but you could see through the crack to outside. It was definitely a crack. And once it stopped spreading open, I waited a couple more weeks, and then a few days ago I filled it in with more concrete, and since then it hasn't opened up anymore. There's no hairline crack, nothing. Um, so my thought process here is that I want all the concrete to settle, however it needs to settle, or if it needs to, um, if it needs to shrink. That I want the cracks to open up as much as they need to relieve all that tension in the concrete, and then I'll fill them in only after the cracks have opened all the way. Now, if this had steel in it, the cracks wouldn't have opened, but that doesn't mean the tension wouldn't have been there. It would just mean in any one spot the steel would be holding cracks closed, so they wouldn't be allowed to open up. So you wouldn't end up with a crack in one spot, but I'm thinking that if there was steel in this wall, you would end up with hairline cracks all along, because you wouldn't be able to get this one spot opening up, right? So the steel would hold it, and maybe it would just have a hairline crack. But the tension would still be there, so you'd end up with more cracks along the wall. And the tension would never be relieved. So you'd end up with the concrete pulling apart and the steel pulling back together, and the two materials would be fighting against each other. Which, kind of works out for a while until one of them fails. So if your steel gets any water in it through the cracks, particularly in a saltwater environment, eventually the steel is going to rust through, and then with all that tension in the concrete, it's just going to pop right open. Plus, then you also have the problem of the steel rusting and expanding and making things worse. So I think there is a real advantage to having everything just kind of, how do you explain it? Having the whole thing just this dead static load that holds itself together, mostly with gravity. Obviously, the concrete, is gluing everything together. But basically, if you remove the adhesive, nothing would make this fall apart. Obviously, if you removed it all and it was just sand, it would fall down. But it doesn't need much to hold its shape, because it's made in a way where everything is in compression. Everything is being pressed down upon. And anywhere there is tension, I just let the crack open, then fill it in once it's finished moving. And then there's no more tension there. Everything is put back in compression. And that way, if part of the ground under the wall settles differently than another part, and one section of the wall wants to sink like 1/8 of an inch more than another section, then it can crack along the sides there. That section of wall can sink however much it needs to get onto solid ground, and then it can fill in the cracks, and everything is in a stable state. It's back to a stable state. Whereas if it had steel in it, if that one section of wall wasn't being supported because it needed to sink to really hit solid ground because the ground shifted or whatever, then the steel would actually be suspending part of the wall. And that whole section of wall would be putting pressure on the walls beside it. So, that's what I'm thinking anyway. I just want to have everything in this whole building just this dead static load that leans on itself, where everything is in compression, nothing is in tension. I had another crack open up here and I left it for a while, but then a week ago I smeared some concrete just on the outside of here to see if it's still opening up, and there's no crack at all, so that means it's stopped moving. And now that I've got shut up, goose. Anyway, now that I've got this side covered up with concrete, and I've done the same to this side and it's got dirt, I can actually just pour concrete right into here, as long as it's thin and doesn't have any rocks, and just fill up the whole crack. Fill up the crack. So this goes against everything I've been told, but it is in line with everything I've experienced. So I guess I'm choosing observation over propaganda, which has worked out pretty well for my life so far.